Welcome to episode 701 of Salsidoparanormal. I'm your host, James Salcido, and tonight we will be talking about bridges and all the paranormal connections to that. So, thank you all for being here. I'm going to skip the usual long introduction about all my social media and ways to support the show and all those things because those links can be found on the episode descriptions for every show. So again, I want to thank everyone for listening and getting the show to over 700 episodes as of this episode here. And whenever I do these topic-based shows, I'm always happy to have guests with me whenever possible. And I want to welcome a good friend of the show on with me. So, Jen, welcome on to the show again. Thank you for being here as usual.
Yes, thank you for having me, James. I'm glad I'm here with you to talk about this.
Yeah, this is something that came out of a previous conversation we had, and I did a little bit of research, but I'm sure we can just cover the topic in general. But yeah, bridges. It's always been. I first kind of found out about them in relation to paranormal in terms of uh, haunted bridges, just places that have bridges where either supposedly or actually, depending on the history that you check on, there have been historic events there or tragic events there or both, and that supposedly led to there being paranormal activity around these bridges. And these are found just all over the world. There's so many of them. I found a couple of articles that list 10 or 11 of each article, and so we can go into those later. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all all of this with bridges and everything else connected to them?
Well, the first thing I was thinking about was, I have had experiences with bridges that I would think there might be something kind of strange going on with it. I think just the passage from one spot to another. I mean, bridges are always used as a way to cross over something that's an obstacle of any kind, and whether that's water or anything else, an obstacle between two places, so a way to link over. So in the case of like a bridge going over a body of water, say a rushing river or something of the kind, there's a vulnerability about getting across the bridge or getting across that obstacle, and it could lead to, like, say there is a bridge over a body of water that's sort of treacherous that you can't just walk across it or something of the kind. They built that bridge because there might have been instances that occurred there. There might have been incidents that happened. And then there's cases which could cause a haunting. There could be people trapped there because of maybe kind of a fouling up of trying to cross a very, strong river of the kind. Could also be
Right.
it. And so another thing, like, for example, on the property I used to live on, there was a bridge that was not far from my home. It was crossing this creek. Whenever it would rain, would basically turn into a river. And they had built a bridge there. The person who owned the properties on both sides of this creek. And so he had a bridge built, but it wasn't really built up to specs. So what had happened was, it's called basically like a drowning machine. I've looked it up. And what it was were the holes that were formed at the bottom of this concrete bridge that would allow the water to flow through. Some of them had been blocked. And so the water going over it had pushed the creek bed out to about 13 feet deep. So if you were coming over that, as many kayakers and people that would like to go tubing, whenever the creek would flood, they'd go over that bridge, and if they tipped into it, they would get sucked down into the undertow and held there. In the accounts that I heard, just before I moved there, actually, 2 boys had drowned going over that bridge in kayaks. And then while I lived there, a woman also met a fatal end when they were, I think they were tubing or canoeing, one of the two, I can't remember. But she got sucked out of her life jacket even at that bridge. So that bridge it made this huge thing on the news, and there was a lot of legal issues involved with it. They ended up tearing that bridge out and building a whole new bridge in that same location. But essentially, it was so dangerous, and there was no signs anywhere or anything. And so I think that's, I mean, kind of the same thing with like the haunted bridge concept. The bridge itself, in this case, was causing the deaths. But then I've also heard about a neighbor of mine had told me about he had what they thought was like they called it a booger, like this concept of what they would call what's equivalent to like a Sasquatch. That had been getting into their root cellar. And one day, these were some like, old time hill people, and the idea was that the the uncle of the neighbor who was telling this happened to his uncle, but that they had caught this creature in their root shed. He had shot at it a couple of times. He thought he had hit it, and then followed a blood trail through the woods. Him and I think his brother or something of the effect, and they went and wound up at a bridge, and the blood trail kind of disappeared underneath the bridge as if the creature had went underneath that bridge, but then there was no body anywhere. So it was like he had disappeared under the bridge as if it was some kind of a portal for it. Kind of like the troll under the bridge concept.
Wow. Yeah. That is and that's goes back to folklore and everything. It makes me wonder now how many beings in the past, whether it's cryptids or Bigfoot or anything like that, have been called trolls because of that whole bridge story and the folklore about bridges and all that. But yeah, that's there's a lot of anytime you have water that's moving fast or deep holes or deep, I don't know, when they have bridges that go over uh, big depressions in the land, maybe even where there's not water, but there's just a huge, like two cliffs or whatever, or two pieces of land. It's there to provide that connection and that safety, but bridges don't always last forever, and of course, and if they're not maintained, then there can definitely be problems there before or during when the bridge was placed there. So yeah, it makes sense that there can be tragedies that would end up leaving, at the very least, energy there in these places that could then show itself in different ways.
Oh, yes. Yes, it did feel that way. Because I would go down there pretty often. And whenever it hadn't rained, you could walk across the bridge just fine and there was no issue. And even many people would go, I swam down around that bridge, but just having that kind of in the back of your mind of what it could turn into in a heavy rain, it did have that kind of feeling.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just going to mention a couple of bridges here. I found a couple articles, and I've heard of ghost sightings and things like that, but there's this one bridge in this article here from Ranker. It's called The Most Haunted Bridges in, let me see, I think it's the U.S. or maybe it's the world. Let me just check on this again. But yeah, it's the most haunted bridges in the world. There we go. Yep. So, but there's this one bridge. I've never heard of this happening in one area, but there's this place in Florida. It's called the Florida Dead Zone along I-4. There's a bridge that has where people supposedly or apparently died in the past, and that have been buried there before any of the bridge was ever made, and apparently it was a burial ground for people that had let me see here. So it was over people had passed away there. I believe, if I'm reading this article right, it was people were buried there who there was like a yellow fever epidemic in the area way back when, and so people were buried there, and then eventually, over time, the I-4 was constructed over a So here we go. I was right. So these yellow fever victims passed away in 1887, and so of course many decades later, 1960, I-4 was under construction, and there was the bridge that was made over this area. People have apparently on their cell phones caught voices coming from their phones of people who basically are from the past, and also these voices have been caught on the radios. There are people that have been passing over this bridge and in this area. So that's really wild. Even catching the sounds of children laughing, and other sounds just over this one bridge, which is over this burial site. So I've heard of electronic events with paranormal and catching voices, but that's really amazing, and it's that happens just in this one spot as well, in Florida. So
Yeah, it is. And I think of it as being like there's the rainbow bridge concept, the bridge that leads from death to the afterlife. But the concepts around bridges in general, the whole folklore about having tolls or particular tasks that one has to do before they can cross any type of bridge in folklore and things like that, or the idea of like a troll living under a bridge and protecting it so as not to allow, individuals or some individuals to cross the bridge unless they follow through some particular obstacles that they want them to perform. Or even the kind of idea that maybe something living under the bridge may use the vulnerability of people being on a bridge or crossing a narrow strip like that and making them a decent victim to the creature. So there's those kinds of concepts that I think are really interesting. And I think, too, the other aspect of it that's really fascinating is that it's not just a bridge between two lands. It could be, for example, like what we're doing right now, using the computer to be kind of a bridge between ourselves here to have this conversation. And the same thing with like a phone, that a phone is a type of a bridge between two individuals. And so any kind of obstacle of any sort, I think seeing that as that making a bridge between the two places is some type of significance there. As far as like why is there a sort of metaphysical aspect to bridges, and then their actual physical locations being the same thing, that when we have the physical location of a bridge, that it also, since somehow it takes up these aspects, not only from loss of life due to being a treacherous spot to cross, like in the case of often over water, and so they built that bridge to keep people, alive. So I think that I think the symbology of bridges, it makes a lot of sense that they would be haunted or they would be surrounded by some type of mysteriousness or, anything of the kind. It makes a lot of sense.
yeah, especially with the water moving and how we know it can make energy that way, and then of course the land having different kinds of stones that can have different energies and all of that, crystals in the land, all those factors as well. But yeah, especially and when it comes to phones or radios, those are sort of modern versions of items from the past that have been used for communication between people that are alive, and then other beings or people from the past that passed on. Of course, everyone has heard of the Ouija board, but there's other things as well. And pendulums have been used. So yeah, that whole idea of trying to connect to other levels of reality using devices, we think of that. It's pretty common, and then we think of these objects. We think of the objects that are smaller that can fit in our hands or be put on a table. But then, if you think about buildings and construction, then it makes sense that maybe these larger constructions and objects could maybe make it easier, amplify the amount of a connection between these other dimensions in certain places.
Yeah. I mean, around that bridge where I lived, down from my property, I often began picking up those, like these little, they call them fairy rings or hagstones. They're rocks that have water bored hole through them. So you have like a rock that has a hole pushed through it. It's just from the flow of water getting into the indentation and then continuing to force until there's a hole in it. Well, I would find like just literally dozens and dozens and dozens of these. And I would string them up on ropes and things like that, and I'd bring them home with me. But, and sometimes, I even began, and I did some videos about this on my channel, but I would begin to sleep uh, with it because I had heard about these being a type of bridge. So these stones themselves, the hole, that you could look through the hole and you could see perhaps into other worlds, or that was the concept of the lore around it also too. But in sleeping, you could use the stone as a type of bridge while you're sleeping to access some, basically another world. So the idea of items being used as a bridge object, but then the bridge itself, or like you're saying with big construction projects, are they some type of, could they also, is it literal? Like with the construction of a bridge, is there something about, I don't think it always, I think that they are susceptible to it. I think that anything that's pulling 2 points together that are an obstacle, it does something like walking through a doorway where you kind of forget what you went into the room for. That study that they talked about, that many people have heard about it, that the phenomena of walking into a room and forgetting what you were going to do why you went into the room to begin with. I think a
Right.
bridge, yeah, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and the other thing about that too with bridges is there's even at this point beyond folklore or stories in the past. There's so many bridges now and roads even where you have similar kinds of reports in different areas about who or what is haunting these areas or in these areas, whether it's soldiers from previous wars that use the bridge or that unfortunately passed away near the bridge. And of course, there's other stories of mothers and children who um, died near the bridge. And there's so many of these, and some of these have been proven to be, at least from what I've heard, just folklore, just urban legends. But people still have experiences, weird experiences near some of these bridges where there is no historical evidence of anything happening, any tragedy happening at a bridge, but then people still have weird experiences there. So, again, is that people sort of manifesting weird energies and things at these places because of a story that then is just amplified by actual events later on. Um, Again, going back to the idea of thought forms and everything being created by people who hear one story. Maybe there was one experience someone had way back when, but it was only one experience. But if the story gets told enough over time, and enough people hear about it and go to check it out, and they have this image in their mind of what happened there, I do think that can also lead to things happening, paranormal activity in these places, just as it can happen in houses as well.
I don't know, if there's a thought form thing connection, but the idea about the soldiers and things like that, a bridge is a perfect choke point. So if you were to have, for example, like a Civil War era or any type of war anywhere or any type of conflicts going on, that's a really good choke point for it's for figuring out how you'd want to attack your opposition because they have to come to that bridge. They can't get, if usually, like I say, if it's going over some type of body of water that it would be otherwise nearly impossible to get across, or at least very difficult, or it'd slow you down. Using that bridge strategically like that was probably really commonly done. And so you might have that as like when you're trying to cross a bridge that has a railroad track on it and there's a train coming and you really don't have a choice but to jump off of it one way or the other. And the concept about the women and babies around bridges, I mean, there's the horrific idea that some women may throw the crying baby around the bridge. And you kind of know where I'm going with that. But there's that sort of notion too. But there's also the idea of something, some type of creature using that area as a sort of choke point or a place to get in, energy or something of the kind. But it also has some kind of, I think, a powerful mental sort of symbolism to it when you go from one side of, and you go crossing over the body of water, or you go crossing over a wide expanse of, like, say, a gorge or something of the kind, and arriving on the other side safe. There's an interesting aspect to it, because I mean, there's rickety rope bridges. People cross jungles with these. I mean, it's really fascinating. So I think the concept about a bridge itself having sort of a powerful effect on the psyche of the person, or even in a dream state if they're trying to do something of the kind. Like when people see bridges in their dreams, quality of the bridge. I think it all has a lot of symbolism to it, but I think it makes sense that there could be something that was already at those locations, and then you go into the concept of how certain spirits can't cross over bridges, or that bridges being used as a sort of territorial boundary.
Right. Or spirits not being able to, or other beings not being able to cross bodies of water unless there's a bridge there as well. I've heard of
Right.
that too.
Yeah.
Um,
So the
yeah.
guarding of the bridges. So there's just all these aspects of it with bridge lore, I think. And I think I've always thought it was really weird and strange, especially with that bridge that was down by my house. It was to know for a fact that in a very short period of time, quite a few people had lost their lives there. But to go walk around it and go swim in the water there and live right next to it, it was just so strange because it was a perfectly peaceful bridge and water unless it rained really heavy, and then it was just so torrentious. Like it would turn into this really dangerous river, and the bridge was of no use. In fact, the bridge was the cause for the danger at that location. You know?
Right. Yeah. I did see something about that, the whole idea of bridges and dreams. If the bridge is sort of, if it's really looks like it's stable and steady and everything, then it can maybe symbolize a transition, and maybe a successful transition from one phase or one part of life to another, one thing in life to another. And if the bridge is, but if the bridge is not, doesn't look solid, or it doesn't look sound, then that can mean maybe that things are literally uncertain and shaky for the person in whatever is going on. I saw that in an article too. So that makes sense that there would be that kind of connection. I just wanted to mention that real quick. But yeah, and there's so many reports of we're gonna be done here in a minute, but there's so many reports of all different kinds of beings around these bridges too. But yeah, and we'll get into more of that next episode here. So thank you again, Jen, for being here, and I'm gonna close out this episode and talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Sounds good.
So thank you all for listening, and we'll be back with one more episode talking about bridges and maybe some more examples here. And yeah, that's the plan for this episode. And we are going back to sort of a full schedule of shows from now on. Every Monday through Thursday, I plan on releasing shows, and that'll be a couple of shows, usually with Jen here whenever possible, and then a couple of my regular shows. I'm noticing here I ended just a little bit early, but I'll just go on for a little bit here. I did just recently watch the sequel to Beetlejuice, so I will do. I'm going to do a review show of both movies, just the plot summary. Jen and I did a great show on the first Beetlejuice movie a while ago, but I want to sort of give my review of the new movie as well. So. Thank you all for being here, and I will talk to you all next time on Salsidoparanormal. Take care.